As Mike Tyson sat on a park bench, a gang of racist bikers, the Iron Fangs, spotted him and saw an opportunity to humiliate the legendary boxer. Thinking he was an easy target, they surrounded him, mocking and taunting him. But what started as harassment quickly turned into a brutal lesson. When they pushed too far, Tyson erupted with unrelenting fury, dismantling the gang with terrifying speed and power. Humiliated and vowing revenge, they returned that night, armed and ready to kill. But they underestimated the beast within Tyson, and what followed was a night of destruction they would never forget. Subscribe and like this video to see how the story unfolds. The afternoon sun, a blazing star in a summer sky, cast its golden rays through the rustling foliage of Hamilton Park, gilding the world in a honeyed light. A gentle breeze danced through the trees, tickling the faces of the picnickers, who laughed and chatted over picnic blankets while joggers pounded the pavement, their footsteps a steady rhythm. There, among the bustle of life, sat Mike Tyson, a lion in sheep's clothing, wearing a humble ensemble of black hoodie, sweatpants, and sneakers. He was a master of disguise, yet the ripple of electricity in the air, the subtle change in the air pressure, betrayed his identity. He was Iron Mike, one of the greatest heavyweight boxers the world had ever seen, but on this day, he was simply Mike, a man seeking a moment of peace in the world he once conquered. As Tyson sat, his eyes fixed on the placid pond where ducks paddled lazily on its mirrored surface, he breathed out a deep, cleansing sigh, savoring the tranquility that eluded him in his high-octane life. For a moment, the world around him stilled, as if holding its breath in reverence for the legendary boxer. But then, without warning, the ground beneath his feet began to shudder, the tremors reverberating through the park like the first whispers of a gathering storm. The guttural bellows of motorcycle engines rent the air, the vibrations rattling the park's trees and shaking the ground beneath Tyson's feet. The peaceful scene was shattered by the intrusion, heads whipping around in surprise as the gang of bikers made their entry, their leather-clad forms and inked skin radiating a sense of menace and chaos. It was as if the motorcycle engines were a howl of warning, declaring their presence and daring anyone to challenge them. The presence of the Iron Fangs sent shivers down the spine of anyone who recognized their insignia, their reputation preceding them like a shadow of fear. These weren't weekend warriors or Sunday drivers. They were hardened men, forged in the fire of violence and bigotry. They didn't come to enjoy the park's serene beauty. They came to mark it with their stain, their presence a warning sign of darker days to come. Like the ground splitting apart under a heavy blow, the Iron Fangs roared to a halt, a symphony of steel and growling engines announcing their arrival. Duke Carter, a man built like a mountain and with eyes as cold as steel, dismounted his Harley with the swagger of a kingpin. His tattoos told a story of hate and intimidation, and his vest bore the emblems of his gang, Iron Fangs MC and Pure Blood Only, declarations of his twisted ideology that twisted humanity's flaws into badges of honor. Today, Duke Carter's arrogance, his hubris, his unshakable belief that he was untouchable would come crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. For today, he had made a fatal mistake, a miscalculation that would leave him reeling. Target acquired. Tyson. Unaware of the legend sitting mere meters away, Duke let loose a sinister chuckle, his eyes scanning the landscape, already visualizing the havoc his gang would wreak. Duke's gaze, sharp as a dagger's edge, swept across the park, dismissing the picnic-goers, the joggers, the children, as nothing more than petty distractions, his eyes searching for a worthy target for his ire. And then, they landed on Mike Tyson, sitting alone on a bench, his unassuming appearance masking the dynamite within. To Duke, this was just another black man, an old man at that, sitting in a place where Duke believed he didn't belong. Duke's smirk was like a lion's grin before a kill, a flash of teeth that promised pain and bloodshed. "Hey, boys," he chuckled, his voice low and menacing. "Look at this, we got a stray sitting on our bench." The pack of Iron Fangs around him erupted in laughter, the cacophony piercing the once peaceful park like nails on a chalkboard. Duke, savoring the moment, his eyes fixed on Tyson, motioned for his gang to follow him, their footsteps crunching against the gravel like approaching thunder. Tyson, his back still turned, sat with a stoic calm, his posture still and his gaze trained on the duck-filled pond before him. To the casual observer, he seemed unbothered by the approaching gang, unaware of the danger lurking mere meters away. But a few of the more astute park-goers, their instinct for self-preservation kicking in, glanced over at the Iron Fangs and their leader, their predatory intent as clear as a knife's edge. Duke, his knuckles popping like firecrackers, advanced towards Tyson, his footsteps like an approaching juggernaut. "Yo, old man," he growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "This here's our turf. You look lost." Tyson, still unmoving, gave no response. He seemed unfazed, a fortress of indifference against the Iron Fang's aggression. Tyson, his gaze unwavering, continued to stare at the serene pond, his expression unreadable, his body seemingly impervious to Duke's intimidation tactics. Duke's smile, once filled with sadistic glee, began to fade, his eyes narrowing to slits as his patience wore thin. "I'm talking to you, boy," Duke hissed, his voice like venom dripping from a serpent's fang. But Tyson remained silent, his silence a defiance in its own right, his focus as impenetrable as a castle's walls. The Iron Fangs, a pack of wolves circling their prey, surrounded Tyson, their breath hot on his neck, their leather vests brushing against his shoulders. They smirked, anticipating the fear, the apprehension that would surely consume their victim in the face of their intimidation. But Tyson, as still and impassive as a statue, refused to flinch, his calmness only stoking the embers of Duke's rage. Duke's eyes, predatory in their intensity, narrowed to slits as he reached out, his rough fingers snatching at Tyson's hood and jerking it back, exposing the face beneath. In that instant, the whole park seemed to gasp in unison, as though a single gust of wind had blown through them, for there, sitting on that bench, was none other than Mike Tyson, his face a roadmap of battles won and scars earned, his eyes cold as polished steel. Duke, his initial shock giving way to a grin as dark as a storm cloud, let out a disbelieving laugh. "Wait a damn second," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with disbelief. "No way, are you Mike freaking Tyson?" Duke, his laughter like a shot of adrenaline in the veins of the biker gang, his arrogance inflamed by his misplaced sense of superiority, chuckled to himself. "Man," he chuckled, his words caustic as acid, "I thought you were dead or something." His eyes raked over Tyson, his gaze as sharp and dismissive as a butcher's knife. "Look at you old washed up sitting on a park bench like some bum. Guess you ain't so tough anymore, huh?" he taunted. Like a predator feigning disinterest until the moment of the kill, Tyson finally shifted his gaze, his dark eyes piercing into Duke's with laser-like precision. The Iron Fang's leader, his smirk faltering, sensed it. The barely contained violence coiled in Tyson's body, the steel-coated certainty of a man who had faced and conquered far worse than Duke could ever imagine. Duke felt a chill skitter down his spine, his cockiness evaporating like morning dew under a noonday sun, replaced by a tremble of doubt. Duke, attempting to mask his wavering confidence with a thin veil of bravado, sneered at Tyson, his voice dripping with contempt. "You hear me, Grandpa?" Duke jeered, his voice slicing through the park's otherwise peaceful atmosphere. "I said this is our park now." In response, Tyson's voice, low and even, cut through the tension like a razor blade through silk. "You should leave." Duke's grin evaporated like smoke, the last vestiges of his pretense at control falling away like the mask of a crumbling actor. In a burst of primal rage, Duke snapped, his instincts taking over as his arm shot out with lightning speed. His fist, a projectile of pure malice, hurtled towards Tyson's face, aiming for his temple with deadly precision. In a blur of motion faster than the eye could follow, Tyson responded. With a whipping pivot, his body uncoiling like a rattlesnake, Tyson's right hook, every ounce of his devastating strength, channeled through his knuckles, collided with Duke's jaw. The impact was thunderous, the sound of bone colliding with bone, a sickening crack ricocheting through the air. Duke's body, flung like a rag doll, was catapulted off the ground, propelled backwards by Tyson's monstrous punch. Duke's feet, his entire body suspended in a brief, cruel moment of weightlessness, left the ground, his limbs flailing helplessly as gravity reasserted its iron grip. His body, a rag doll in the hands of Tyson's devastating blow, spun through the air, the whipping motion a grotesque caricature of grace. And then, with a sickening thud, Duke slammed into the pavement, his body still and unmoving, a crumpled heap of twisted limbs. One punch, one knockout. Tyson's declaration of dominance hung heavy in the air. The park, as if frozen in time by some wizard's spell, stood still, the air thick with disbelief. The iron fangs, paralyzed by the sheer brutality of Tyson's display, gaped at their fallen leader, their jaws agape like dumbstruck fish. Tyson, his breathing controlled and measured, rose from the bench with a deliberate calmness, his eyes scanning the group of bikers, still shaken by the fallout from his devastating blow. One of the bikers, driven by rage and adrenaline, lunged towards Tyson, his body a blur of anger and reckless impulse. But with a nimble sidestep, Tyson evaded the biker's reckless charge, his movements fluid and deadly. In a flash of blinding speed, Tyson launched a brutal uppercut that crashed into the biker's midsection, delivering a crushing blow that left him gasping for air. As the biker stumbled, stunned, Tyson executed a swift spin, his powerful arm lashing out in a vicious backhand that connected squarely with the man's jaw. The second biker, his weapon of choice a steel chain, uncoiled it with a wild, feral swing aimed at Tyson's face, the links clanking together in a menacing cacophony. Yet, even as the chain hurtled towards him, Tyson was already in motion. A quick duck, his body curving like a bow as the chain sailed harmlessly above him. And then, in the blink of an eye, Tyson was inside the biker's guard, his movements swift and graceful. Tyson's elbow, honed to a lethal edge through years of training and experience, slammed into the biker's nose with a sickening crunch, snapping it like a twig. The biker, his body reeling from the impact, staggered backwards, his knees giving way beneath him. A ripple of trepidation spread among the remaining bikers, one of whom, his hand trembling with fear and adrenaline, drew a knife from his belt. The crowd, an audience to the unfolding violence, gasped as one, their horror at the sight of the knife tangible, their collective fear palpable. Yet Tyson, unfazed by the blade's glinting presence, responded with a measured gesture. He tilted his head to the side, his neck producing a brief, almost musical crack as he rolled his shoulders, limbering up for the fight ahead. The biker, his knife glinting in the sunlight, lunged towards Tyson in a desperate bid to regain his gang's pride and dominance, but Tyson, his movements as silent as a phantom's, sidestepped the attack with a fluid grace, his hands snaking out to seize the biker's wrist with an iron grip. Tyson's strength, the product of countless hours in the gym, seemed preternatural, allowing him to wrench the blade from the biker's grasp with ease. The final biker, paralyzed by the devastating speed and skill of Tyson's assault, stood immobile, his wide eyes filled with disbelief, his fear mounting like a rogue wave. Realizing his peril, he turned tail and fled, sprinting towards his motorcycle and mounting it with frantic haste. The roar of the engine, as loud and guttural as the scream of a wounded animal, filled the park, drowning out even the shocked gasps of the onlookers as the biker vanished into the distance, leaving his fallen comrades in his wake. Tyson, the sweat of exertion glistening on his brow, surveyed Duke's prone form with a mixture of contempt and pity. Duke, his face a swollen mask of blood and bruises, looked like a broken puppet, a pitiful imitation of the intimidating figure he had been only moments before. The bystanders, their faces a blur of awe and shock, murmured among themselves, the trauma of the event sending ripples of excited, hushed whispers through the crowd. Some, their phones clutched tightly in their hands, had captured the violence on camera, a testament to Tyson. Indeed, Tyson knew that the park's fleeting tranquility would soon be shattered, the remnants of the afternoon's violence just the first act in a grander, more deadly drama. For that night, the Iron Fangs would return, a storm gathering on the horizon, their numbers bolstered by their thirst for vengeance. The serenity of the day would be replaced by the cold steel of knives, the cacophony of fists on flesh, and the brutality of gang warfare, as the streets of Hamilton Park were transformed into a battleground, with Tyson standing at its center. As twilight's velvet mantle shrouded the park, its once pleasant contours twisted by the all-consuming darkness, a sinister undercurrent thrummed through the streets, the flickering of streetlights, a feeble defense against the encroaching night. Tyson's legend had spread, the footage of his merciless assault on the Iron Fang's bikers ricocheting across social media like a digital wildfire, his face the latest viral sensation. But this newfound notoriety had also placed a target on his back, attracting the attention of those eager to test their mettle against the legendary boxer. As the world, captivated by the unfolding drama, waited with bated breath, the Iron Fangs, their anger a raging inferno that consumed their every thought, set out for revenge. The roar of their engines, a deafening symphony of metal and fury, reverberated through the otherwise quiet streets, announcing their arrival like a declaration of war. The dark road trembled beneath the weight of 15 motorcycles, their headlights a sinister glow in the night, piercing the darkness with merciless ferocity. At the vanguard, Butch, the Reaper Wallace, Duke's loyal lieutenant, his face a hardened mask of malice and vengeance, led the charge, his knuckles whitening on the handlebars as he spurred his bike towards Hamilton Park. The pack, like a wolf pack on the hunt, followed in his wake, eager to sink their teeth into their prey. For Butch, vengeance was more than just a fleeting urge. It was an all-consuming obsession, a relentless force that propelled him onward like a demon hot on the scent of brimstone. Duke, his jaw a disfigured mess of broken bones and pulped flesh, had roused from unconsciousness hours ago, his voice a garbled string of incoherent slurs. Even in his disheveled state, Duke's eyes burned with an inextinguishable hatred for Tyson, a hatred that Butch, as loyal as a rabid dog, had adopted as his own. Butch, his face a grim mask of determination, rode towards Hamilton Park with the grim efficiency of a reaper on his rounds. "Tonight," he snarled, his voice a guttural roar that rose above the cacophony of the engines, "we make Tyson pay." With a squeal of tires and a cloud of burning rubber, the gang screeched to a halt at the park's entrance, the night air rife with the stench of gasoline and fury. Hamilton Park, once bustling with life and laughter, was now a hollow shell, the shrieking echoes of silence a testament to the shadow of violence that had befallen it. Yet Tyson remained, his figure sitting stoically on the same wooden bench, his silhouette illuminated by the stark moonlight, like a statue of a fallen warrior. Tyson, like a seasoned general, had anticipated the bikers' return, their blatant threats and brazen presence enough of an omen to set his senses alight. In the quiet stillness of the night he sat, unmoving, his inner calm radiating from his figure like a halo, a silent force that belied the danger of the moment. His eyes, dark and penetrating, seemed to pierce the night, his focus razor-sharp as he awaited their approach. Tyson had never run from a fight in his life, and he certainly wasn't about to start now. As the gang spilled into the park, their every step an orchestral accompaniment to their violent intentions, Tyson heard it all. The stomping boots, the metallic slither of chains, the ominous sound of blades being drawn from their sheaths, the click of safety catches being released, and, perhaps most terrifying of all, the ominous sounds of firearms being primed for battle, the cold steel of their barrels trained on him like the barrels of a firing squad. This time the gang's intentions were as clear as the moonlight illuminating the park. They were not here for a fight. They were here to end Tyson's life, to silence him for good. Their thirst for retribution too powerful to be quenched by mere fisticuffs. And then a voice, like a gunshot in the silence, rang out. "Get up, old man!" It spat, dripping with venom. Tyson, like a sleeping dragon, stirred not. He remained seated, his posture poised, his eyes still fixed ahead. Butch, his muscles rippling with anger, stepped forward, his tattooed arms a tapestry of violence and hate. With a fluid, almost practiced motion, he produced a sawed-off shotgun from his back, the weapon gleaming with deadly intent. "You think what you did today was funny?" he snarled, his voice a lethal instrument. "You humiliated my boys, knocked Duke's teeth out, and now you're just sitting here like nothing happened?" Tyson, his defiance a wall of iron, remained unmoved, his silence an impenetrable fortress against Butch's fury. Butch, his face contorted into a vicious mask of rage, spat out his words like venom. "You ain't leaving here tonight, Tyson, not in one piece," he sneered, his eyes like twin fires of hatred. Butch, his weapon leveled at Tyson's chest like a harbinger of death, relished the moment, the anticipation and hatred like a drug coursing through his veins. The other bikers, their weapons, a gleaming array of knives, chains, and pistols, bristling with the promise of violence, closed in, their eyes alight with the sick pleasure of delivering what they perceived to be justice. But this was no mere fight. It was an execution, a cleansing of what they perceived as a threat, an attempt to eradicate Mike Tyson from their world. But just when the moment seemed to freeze, when the world seemed to pause in anticipation of the gunshot that would signal Tyson's demise, something unexpected happened. A smirk, like a crack of lightning against a dark sky, spread across Tyson's face. His movement was explosive, his right hand shooting out with the speed and precision of a striking cobra, seizing the barrel of the shotgun. Butch, his expression frozen in a moment of disbelief, found himself caught off guard, his weapon suddenly neutralized. With a blur of motion, Tyson flipped the shotgun with startling dexterity, using its own weight to augment his attack. The buttstock of the weapon met Butch's face with a devastating crack, the sound reverberating through the park as his nose erupted in a spray of blood. Staggering backwards, his curses a garbled mixture of pain and shock, Butch's face contorted into a mask of agony, the arrogance of moments before replaced by the realization that he was facing an entirely different kind of opponent. As the park erupted into a frenzy of violence and pandemonium, the gang's unity dissolved, their individual members transformed into feral animals desperate to inflict harm. The first biker, his fist encased in brass knuckles, lunged forward, his aim true and his intent lethal. But Tyson, displaying reflexes that defied his years, leaned back, evading the blow by a hair's breadth, his body twisting with serpentine agility. With a swiftness that belied his age, Tyson launched his counterattack, his right hook uncoiling from its tucked position like a serpent unfurling for the kill. The biker, his jawbone shattering under the force of the impact, stumbled backwards, his body limp as it crumpled to the ground, his consciousness slipping away in a haze of agony. The other bikers, their bloodlust unchecked, closed in like a pack of rabid wolves, the fear of Tyson's devastating efficiency driving them to even greater levels of reckless savagery. The remaining bikers, their fear transformed into a desperate frenzy, rushed towards Tyson, their weapons poised to strike. The first biker swung his knife, the blade glinting in the moonlight, a silver serpent poised to bite Tyson. But Tyson, his movements liquid and almost ethereal, dodged to the side, his hand darting out like a striking eagle to grab the biker's wrist. With a savage twist, Tyson redirected the biker's momentum, the blade's edge skimming past his ribs and plunging deep into the biker's stomach. The biker's scream, a primal sound of agony and disbelief, echoed through the park, his body convulsing as blood, dark and sticky, began to stain the grass beneath him. The other biker, seizing the opportunity, aimed a chain, its links gleaming with the promise of pain, straight at Tyson's head. The biker, his adrenaline clouding his judgment, had made a fatal mistake. Tyson, a portrait of efficiency, surged forward, his hand gripping the links of the chain. With a powerful jerk, he pulled the biker towards him, an unstoppable force meeting a terrified, immovable object. The remnants of the iron fangs, their movements stalling, froze in place, their bloodlust curdling into fear as they took in the scene around them, their fallen leader, their crippled comrades, the evidence of Tyson's utter brutal dominance of the situation. With a series of sharp, biting cracks, Tyson flexed his fingers, his gaze sweeping over the bikers like a searchlight in the night. "You boys really think this is going to go your way?" Tyson growled, his voice a dark promise of violence. Butch, his face a crimson ruin, his voice thick with blood, dragged himself back to his feet, his body shaking with rage. "Shoot him!" he howled, his words an order and a desperate plea in one. Two of the remaining bikers, their eyes filled with a mix of hate and fear, drew their pistols, the muzzles of their weapons pointing at Tyson like the eyes of a sniper's scope. In the space between a heartbeat and a breath, Tyson erupted into action, his movements sudden and deadly. With a predatory grace, he snatched up a fallen knife from the ground, its blade coated in the blood of its previous owner, and, in a single fluid motion, hurled it towards the first gunman. The blade pierced the air, a blur of steel, before burying itself in the gunman's chest with a wet, sickening thwack, dropping him to his knees with a gasp, the gun falling from his suddenly limp fingers. The first gunman's screams filled the air, a desperate chorus of agony and disbelief. The second gunman, his nerves frayed by fear and adrenaline, fired blindly, his bullet whipping past Tyson's shoulder like a vengeful spirit. But Tyson, his instincts honed to a razor's edge, dodged the bullet as if it were nothing more than a fly buzzing around his head, his feet carrying him towards the gunman with blistering speed. Before the shooter could register the situation, Tyson was upon him, his movements like those of a panther on the hunt. Tyson, his elbow like a battering ram of bone, crashed into the gunman's throat, the force of the blow dislodging his windpipe, crushing it into a bloody pulp. The biker fell to his knees, his face contorted with the agony of suffocation, his hands grasping uselessly at his throat as he toppled to the ground, every breath a desperate struggle. Amid the chaos, the smell of blood heavy in the air, Tyson stood, surveying the remaining bikers. Butch, his face an almost cartoonish caricature of fury, grabbed a length of steel pipe from the cargo rack of his bike, his blood-caked hand squeezing the cold metal so hard it threatened to bend. He roared, a primal scream of hatred and violence, as he launched himself at Tyson, his body moving with a reckless desperation that bordered on suicidal. "I'm gonna kill you, Tyson," he bellowed, his words a premonition of death. Butch, his weapon singing through the air like a scythe of death, swung the pipe with lethal force. Yet Tyson, his reflexes quicker than thought, dropped beneath the arc of the pipe, his body rolling like a wave as he avoided the crushing blow. And then, in a lightning-fast counter-strike, Tyson unleashed a thunderous uppercut, his fist driving into Butch's ribcage like a pile driver, the sound of splintering bone a cacophony of agony. Butch, his body quivering like a leaf in a storm, staggered backwards, his eyes wide with shock as he struggled for breath. But Tyson, relentless as the tide, advanced upon him, his movements fluid and unyielding. With a sudden, explosive movement, Tyson reached out, his fingers grasping the lapels of Butch's vest like a vice, and with a savage, fluid motion, hurled him onto a nearby park bench with enough force to crack its wooden slats. Butch lay motionless, his body crumpled like a discarded rag, his eyes closed as if in a peaceful slumber, his consciousness a fleeting memory. The remaining bikers, their eyes darting from the fallen form of their leader to the scattered, groaning forms of their fellow gang members, exchanged anxious glances. Their hubris, once a roaring fire in their bellies, had been extinguished, leaving behind only ashes of defeat. With a suddenness that spoke of their shattered pride and battered fear, the remaining bikers, like rats fleeing the rising tide, scattered, their motorcycles a chorus of metal and rage. The screeching of tires, a mad screech of panic, echoed through the night as the bikers fled, leaving their wounded and unconscious brethren behind like sacrifices on the altar of Tyson's brutality. The park, once again silent, bore the scars of their presence, the last echoes of their bikes fading into the night like a fading memory. As the night sky yawned above him, Tyson stood amidst the wreckage, a lone figure in the shattered ruins of battle. His hoodie, tattered and torn like a war banner, hung from his shoulders, the crimson stains of his opponent's blood, a grim testimony to his prowess. Beneath the torn fabric, Tyson's fists, scarred and bruised, clenched and unclenched, their power still barely contained, his lethal grace undiminished even in the wake of the ferocious fight. As the night rolled on, the distant echo of police sirens, wailing like banshees in the still air, signaled the impending arrival of the authorities. But Tyson, a specter in the shadows, was already gone, his form swallowed by the darkness, his whereabouts unknown to all save himself. The police, upon arriving, discovered a scene of carnage that rivaled a battlefield, the battered bikers groaning in pain, their bones broken and spirits crushed, with Duke's motionless form draped across the park bench like a cautionary tale. Within hours, the videos of Tyson's unholy rampage, a raw and unadulterated display of primal power, spread like a viral wildfire across the internet. The world, already captivated by his earlier performance, was now spellbound by the raw, savage spectacle of his second bout, the footage looping endlessly on social media, each view adding to Tyson's infamy. But beyond the spectacle of blood and brutality, the footage served as a chilling reminder to those who sought to cross him, a warning of the savagery that lurked beneath his measured surface. The world, having witnessed the unbridled power unleashed upon his enemies, was reminded of Tyson's status as the most fearsome and ferocious fighter of his era, the apex predator in a sea of violent undercurrents. The iron fangs, their machismo and swagger, laid bare as a paper tiger against Tyson's fury, learned their lesson the hard way, their pride swallowed by the reality of their destruction, their power shattered like brittle glass beneath the force of Tyson's fists. Tyson, the once and future king, had reasserted his dominance,